Oathbringer is a very long book. How long, you might ask? Well, let's say you started the audiobook at your home in Vancouver, Canada, and decided to just drive while you listened to the audiobook. If you kept listening to the very end, you would drive all the way to Mexico City, Mexico, and still have 6 hours left in the book. That sounds like a joke. It's true. Look it up. Hey everybody, Andy here. This is my review of Brandon Sanderson's Oathbringer, the third book in the Stormlight Archive. I'm very nervous about this review because I have to tell you right here from the beginning, I did not like this book. This is going to be the closest thing so far on my channel to a Rant review. It's not quite that, but I was not a huge fan of Oathbringer. As always, I'm going to start out with a non-spoiler portion of this review, and then I'll give you a spoiler warning, and then for the rest of the review, I'm going to talk spoilers. So let's start out with that non-spoiler review. There's only so much I can say as far as plot overview. This is the third book in a very big, epic fantasy. So if you haven't read any of them, I would recommend getting off now. Go watch my Way of Kings review. But at the beginning of Oathbringer, we are at Uruthiru, I think is how you say that. The tower, city in the sky, the Everstorm have started. The Parshmen are starting to attack, or the Singers, as we hear them called, are attacking. And really this whole book is just about sort of the next phase of this tension and this conflict between mankind, really, and the Parshmen, or the Singers. As in previous Stormlight Archive books, this book chooses to focus on the past of one of our main characters in an Oathbringer. It is Dalinar, and I have to say, while I wasn't jazzed about the book as a whole, the flashback scenes with Dalinar I think are a strength of the book. I think they are, for the most part, very informative and in many ways surprising, and I think really pay off well in the overall narrative. So I do think that if you are a big Dalinar fan, Oathbringer is really going to bring you a lot of good character development that you've been looking for from that character, even more so than the first two, where he was obviously center stage as well. And of course, with all Brandon Sanderson books, there are some definite really cool epic moments, cool plot points, great ideas. He's just an ideas man that really throws a lot at the wall, especially in this book, and some of it does stick. And there are some definite wow moments, especially as you get towards the end. This is my least favorite finale, even though there are still some definite interesting things that happen. But as I said previously, for the most part, I am not a huge fan of Oathbringer. It is very, very long. And I know a lot of Sanderson readers know him from the Wheel of Time, and if you've read Wheel of Time, you know pretty famously that books like 7 through 10 are known as the slog in those communities, where basically the story feels like it gets too bloated and nothing happens to the main overarching plot, and it gets confusing and bogged down by a lot of different things and relationships. That's how I feel about Oathbringer. I feel as though Sanderson is taking after Jordan a little bit. His story's getting a little bloated, and for some reason, I think because of the massive success, there's not as much editing going on as there should be, and I just don't think that all of the things that Sanderson tried to squeeze into this book should have been squeezed in here, whether placed in other books or just cut out of the story as a whole. I just think there was too much. And I should say, I'm going to say a lot more about this in the spoiler section, but it's not just that too much happens. It's that a lot of different stuff happens without any depth to any particular storyline or plot line or key character developments or anything like that. It's just a lot of numerical stuff, not a lot of depth. And you'd think with 1,200 plus pages, we'd get more depth. And again, I'll talk more about that. And I should say, if you've watched my 2 other reviews of the Stormlight Archive books, in both of those reviews, I basically say that I find some problems with Sanderson's actual writing and the way that he tells us a lot of things and doesn't show us a lot of things and tends towards info dumps. I didn't really jive with his sense of humor. A lot of that stuff is still there, but from those other reviews, you know that I think there's so much cool shit, for lack of a better way to put it, that happens in these books that it makes up for it and makes it a really enjoyable time. I feel like with Oathbringer, I got all of the negatives and none or very little of those cool moments that I come to Sanderson books for. So for the most part, I'm not a huge fan of Oathbringer. In my review system, I'm going to actually give this a if you enjoy X rating, which this is the category where I can understand where people would enjoy things, especially if they like other things. In this case, if you like the Stormlight Archive, you'll probably like Oathbringer. Or at the very least, like me, you'll see it as potentially valuable if the series gets back to how it was before, or if some of these plot points maybe get further developed later on, or if you really, really enjoy some of these characters. I think you should still read Oathbringer, and I think you'll probably find things to like in it, but for the most part, I myself personally was not a fan. So unfortunately, that's going to be it for my non-spoiler. Let's go into spoiler ratings where I can really talk more about my thoughts on this book. Alright, spoiler time. Let's roll up the sleeves because this is going to get pretty ranty. But before that, I do want to talk about some of the good things in more detail. Because one of the things I kind of debated if I should say in this non-spoiler section that I chose to stick here is that I really think it's cool the different representations of mental illness that is portrayed in this book. I don't think it's done perfectly, and I'll talk about some of that in a little bit, but for the most part, I haven't seen addiction dealt with in quite as much depth as I have in this book. I really think, especially with the things around Dalinar and his drink, the way that we really dwell on that, I think is really, really powerful. Same with theft. Sanderson doesn't go for a quick and easy fix, which sometimes he does, and we'll get to that in other areas, but I think in addiction particularly they do that, as well as some things like imposter syndrome and depression in other characters I think is dealt with really well. So I think that is cool, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that he's listened to some of his fans and started incorporating LGBTQ characters. I think is great. I hope is going to become more central in this series. I also, again, want to emphasize what I already said in the non-spoiler review, which is there are some cool things there, and if you like these characters, I can definitely understand why there are moments in this book that would really speak to you and that you would enjoy, especially if you're a big Dalinar fan. So there are positives in Oathbringer. Also, one specific positive that I really love and I just want to shout out is the wedding at the beginning between Navani and Dalinar, presided by the Stormfather. I think that's really cool and a really great image. Also, the prologue started out very well. I love that I'm guessing each of these prologues, and actually at this point I've listened to the prologue of Earthen and More, so I know this is true, that each of the prologues is going to be about the night that Dalinar's brother was assassinated. From different perspectives. I think that could be really cool in a Rashomon-esque way, especially if there's like a big reveal in like book 10 or book 5 or something. But that's going to be kind of the end of the positives here, because I have a lot of negatives. In fact, I basically just wrote a list of negatives and things that I want to talk about. So this is not really in any particular order, but things that I feel like I really need to get off my chest that I did not like about this book. So first, as I mentioned multiple times now, I just think this book is too long, there's too much fat, I think it needed to be more tightly edited. And I don't just think about the book as the whole, I think actually each section of the book, I feel that same way, that each section is just, we're in a place doing a thing for too long every step of the way in this book, which really by the end drags, and the pacing, which is something that Sanderson is normally so good at, just falls apart for me in this book. So I mentioned there's 4 basic parts. There's the beginning tower section at Uruthuru, and then after that they go to Kholinar, the capital, spend a lot of time there. Then they spend a good amount of time in Shadesmar, and then the end, just that huge climax that seems to go on forever, and then a bit of resolution in the epilogue at the end. And I'm not even counting in there the flashbacks with Dalinar or the interludes that go on in between there, or some of the random side plots like Eshonai or Moash or Teft. So there's so much happening, and as I said, I feel like all of these various elements are just kind of thrown in and not dealt with any depth at all. And so I want to talk about those individual things that I feel like are interesting ideas but that aren't developed because there's just too much else going on, or we are going too fast or too slow and spending too much time somewhere else. And another way to put this, by the way, because I have, every time I post one of these reviews, at least one person will tell me, oh, well, in Sanderson's lectures, there's such and such and such and such. I've watched those lectures. I enjoy those lectures by Sanderson. And side note, I think Sanderson's an excellent human being from everything that I can see, and I love his reaction, or his interaction with his fans, even starting the YouTube page. Like, I really like the guy. So this is not like personal in any sense. But anyway, to prove that I've watched those lectures, I want to say he talks a lot about promises made to the reader and keeping most of them, and when you obviously break a promise, to make it worthwhile. And almost all of these examples, I feel like Sanderson has made a promise to me in previous books that he did not keep or did not keep well in this book. So if that helps in how you're conceptualizing my criticisms of this book, there you go. All right, so first, let's talk about Shallan's mental journey in this book, because I just don't think it is explained very well or made very clear. So she is struggling with maybe like multiple personality disorder, but my understanding of that disorder psychologically is that it is literally like different personalities, obviously the name of it, coming into the person. Whereas with Shallan, it seems like maybe it's like different versions of herself, not separate personalities, but like she's breaking herself apart and doesn't know exactly who she is, so she's struggling with identity, which is an interesting struggle, but like it's not clear what that is, why it's happening in this particular moment. Is it with her dealing with her trauma of her past, or is it because of where she is in her present? Is it connected to her love life, which it sometimes is very clearly connected to in the prose, but like that seems kind of shallow, just like she's choosing between these two guys, so it breaks her apart into three different people. And also, as one of our main protagonists, it's hard for us to sort of stick with the perception of our character, which is a key point in characterization as a writing technique. So I think it really hurts Shallan and her viewpoint from us as the reader. Also, I think the way that Sanderson communicates this with like actually switching perspectives or names on the page is oftentimes clunky, like going between Vale and Shallan and Radiant in like the same paragraph at times. For me, just sort of brought attention to the writing rather than immerse me more in the experience. I can see what he was trying to do, but I just didn't think it was helpful. And like I said, with mental disability and illness representation, I think it's unclear what everything in Shallan's storyline means, and so it weakens that. Another storyline that is severely underdone is Adolin and his guilt about killing Sadeas and any sort of consequences for the Sadeas storyline. We spend a lot of time on this in the first quarter of the book, with Adolin being nervous and shy and it affecting his relationship with Shallan and his father, and obviously causing a lot of stress for him, and there's tension to see how Shallan is going to feel when she finds out about this, blah, 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 and nothing comes of it. Like, he tells Shallan, and she's like, yeah, that's fine, I would do that too, and he tells his father, and his father's like, oh, that sucks, but then moves on. Like, there's no consequences, there's no stakes, it's just like, okay, whatever. And now Sadeas' army is either part of the Voidbringers, or like they'll be so repentive that they'll come back just to the army. So like, it's not like there's like tensions in the war camps anymore. Like, that just came to nothing, and it was such a big deal at the end of Words of Radiance that just didn't mean anything in this book. Let's also talk about the Unmade, these Spren, I guess, who are really powerful. It's just like not explained to us at all, but there's like a certain number of them that they have to deal with. I think 11. There's a lot of numbers in this book. Like, there are 10 Radiants and 10 Orders and 11 Unmades you have to deal with. Like, it kind of feels like a I'll say this a lot in this review, a lot of like video game checkpoints or side plots, as it were. And the Unmade just felt like that. Like, they're not well described what they are or why they're there. In fact, the Ghostbloods in their letter to Shallan are like, the tower feels wrong, and like that's how she talks to Renarin about it, and that's like supposed to be a big part of this whole thing, and it just is, I guess. I don't know, it's just like those stakes don't feel real to me, and that enemy doesn't feel like defined. Did not enjoy that at all. One of my favorite parts of Words of Radiance is the chapter that we get from the monk, who she comes into the city and she sees all this excess and she is like aghast, and she talks about how Light Eyes, and specifically the Queen, like indulges too much. It's against the religion, and like she does this thing in the throne room, and that causes her to be killed and executed by the Queen's order, and that causes riots to start in the city. And I think I was so excited because I thought that was going to be where we get the tension between the Light Eyes and the Dark Eyes, and societal wrongs and societal divisions of power that were unjust. That was a theme in the first 2 books. Interesting to see where that go. And in this, that's just like, oh, it's the Unmade. It's like, you know, that they're causing excess in the capital, and that's what causes this. And that, you know, it's just some outside force. It's not dealing with the actual, like, ills of their society at all. In a larger sense, one of the things I was super critical about in the first 2 is how those power structures in society were dealt with Light Eyes and Dark Eyes, and how oftentimes Dark Eyes not only were the brunt in the society, but in the story they bared the brunt of that, especially Kaladin. And in this one, instead of, you know, clearing that up or helping with that, basically we just have Kaladin becoming a Light Eyes, and then that whole system of power is done away with, because now we're talking about the Parshmen and that structure of power, and does so kind of sloppily. Doesn't talk about Light Eyes or Dark Eyes hardly at all. And then even worse is there's this confusing revelation at the end that it's actually the humans who colonized and conquered Roshar and subdued the Parshmen and enslaved them. And we're supposed to then root for humanity, but like, it's not done like very well. And my guess is the whole like unite them thing is going to be actually the Parshendi and the humans need to unite. But it's not, there's none of that groundwork, in my view, is laid very responsibly, especially when you think of how it's reflecting on our current, you know, situation here on Earth, which I think all stories should reflect in some way our world. And I just thought it was done very sloppily and just didn't have enough time done because too much other stuff was happening. And the whole episode in Shadesmar, I actually thought was somewhat interesting. This world of the Spren, like humans live there? Why do humans live there? What's their ecosystem like? What are their cities? They don't need to eat. So it's a very interesting idea, but like, again, because there was so much other stuff going on, like while they're in Shadesmar, they're trying to get the love triangle going, and then we're dealing with everyone's sadness, and Syl is like getting arrested, but there's also the Fused that are everywhere trying to kill them. They're on the run the whole time. So like, it's an interesting idea, but just we don't get enough to really piece together what's happening there. And we don't know what Yasna was doing in Shadesmar for that long. She hinted in the epilogue of Words of Radiance that she was doing really important stuff, but then she comes back and we don't really know what she was doing that whole time. Oh, that reminds me. The whole Yasna storyline, like, it's this big deal. She comes back from the dead, and like, we don't get anything about that in the story. So like, she's back. Okay, all right. Now we're dealing with how Shallan doesn't want to be a ward. Like, that's the first tension we go to. Not, holy shit, Yasna is alive. We don't get anything from Navani. A chapter where she breaks down and says, holy shit, Yasna is alive. Like, no one's gonna be surprised about this. It's just like, oh, Yasna's back. Whoa! Go to the library and figure out what we need to do with these Spren. It's just like, what? We're not going to deal with the physical and emotional repercussions of Yasna coming back from the dead? Another promise not kept, the thing that I really appreciated in Words of Radiance is the expanding, like, morality and sides, for lack of a better term, like these different factions that are fighting for different things, but potentially still on the right side, so to speak. So, like, we have this group, the Ghost Bloods, that Shallan is kind of a part of, and they're like recruiting her, and her brother was there, so that's interesting. The diagram with Taravangian I thought was really interesting and exciting. And then of course we have the Parshmen and the different factions within the Parshmen, and then of course we have our heroes and what they're trying to do. And so there's all these different like ideologies and how we fight, and Oathbringer like does that for a little while, but for the most part does away with that complexity and goes back to very simple bad side, good side. Odium's side, and then human side. And Taravangian, like, just eventually is on Odium's side, and the Ghost Bloods are basically like that side quest in an RPG video game that you play, like, that you can do that side quest if you want, and that'll get you a platinum trophy, but you don't really have to beat the game. That's how the Ghost Bloods think. They even send like that letter to Shallan that basically reads like a quest dialogue in a RPG. It's like, hey, something's wrong in the tower. Investigate it and get rid of it. At the bottom of that page, it might as well have said, experience gained 2,000 if you complete. Like, it just felt so quest heavy. Oh. And then, of course, the usual info dumps. Like, there's literally like one letter that tells us like a ton of information at once because we need to know certain things. Speaking of undeveloped plot lines and characters, I mentioned that I really liked Dalinar's flashback, but for 2 books now, we've had foreshadowed this very important character of, we didn't know her name, but Evie, who is Dalinar's wife. And she as a character is as flat as possible. There's nothing complex about Evie. Her character is that she is a woman who doesn't want Dalinar to fight and kill people. That is her story. That is her like person. That is what she exists to do. And she also exists obviously to die and to be fridged to give motivation to Dalinar's character. Which I think actually that's a good twist. I wasn't expecting that. She as a character and her resonance in the story just like is so underdeveloped and not there that it did not hammer home for me at all when we were trying to hammer in the grief. Not because I didn't feel bad for Dalinar and his development, but because Evie, I didn't know her. I didn't know who she was, why she was here. I didn't really feel her pain at being in this terrible marriage. It's just like it wasn't done well. I'd be honest, her as a character, nothing. Speaking of characters that I think weren't super well done is Moash. I know that there's a Reddit group called Fuck Moash, and people don't like Moash as a whole, but like, what has Moash really done to be like the bad besides odium in this book? He didn't like Light Eyes because they abused him, they killed his parents, and like for just reasons. And sure, he was involved in the diagrammers, and that brought him to want to kill Elithkar, which he does eventually. Obviously, that's bad. But he's not as bad as Dalinar, as we've seen in this book. He definitely hasn't killed as many people as Kaladin. And Kaladin in this book sympathizes with the Parshendi people that he's killed a lot of. I just think like the way that the story is told to make Moash like this terrible person is just not... I mean, sure, he's a bad guy, but like... I don't know, I just don't feel the passion behind this bad guy that apparently a lot of people in the community do. And part of that might be because I don't buy the whole like, Elithkar, he's trying, so he should be okay when he's a king of a nation, given every privilege, given every opportunity to do good in the world, probably the most powerful person in the world. And I'm supposed to feel better for him because he's trying? I just don't, that's such a bare minimum for a king. I just can't get behind that. Also, getting back to Shallan, since we're talking about underdeveloped character growth, like, the whole thing with her in Kholinar, I think, is so weak. Like, the whole storyline is her gathering and stealing food to this cult so that she can go up to this pedestal when, like, her whole thing is, like, drawing faces and, like, being deceptive and, like, espionage. She should have been able to do that night one. Like, it's so convoluted, and I understand like the character beats that Sanderson was going on, but it just like didn't. Even though the wit moment, I will admit, it was very nice. It just like didn't feel that is where the story needed it to go, and was overly convoluted, and again added to that just slow, terrifyingly slow pace. Renarin, another character, vastly underdeveloped. We don't get a lot of time with him, but he's supposed to have a huge character beat at the end when he's almost dead. And quite clearly is supposed to have like this big moment. But like, I don't know Renarin from Adam. Like, truly. Our first perspective shot, I think, is when he's almost killed by Yasna. I could be wrong. Maybe there's one or two in there. But like, I have no idea what's happening with him, so why am I feeling for him, and why am I supposed to feel for him? Ugh! Kaladin storyline. One of the strongest characters in the Stormlight Archive is given almost nothing to do, or just like fetch quests in this, or just rerunning his story from Way of Kings. In fact, Sanderson reruns the story of the Way of Kings twice in this book with Kaladin. He has 2 proto Bridge 4 scenarios. He has it with the Parshmen, where he like teaches them and becomes pals with them, and then they die and he deals with the guilt all over again. And then he does it again with the city guard in Kholinar. Like, it's the same beat. He goes to the city watch and he starts being friends with all these people, and then they die and he feels the guilt of it. Like, I understand that's tough, but like, Sanderson, think of something else to do with Kaladin. Like, he's a great character. Like, give him a real maybe love story, or like allow him to grow as like a military leader, or give him, I don't know what, like maybe just like a good friendship with someone. It's just like, that's lazy. I mean, I'm sorry, lazy storytelling. And again, 2 of those story beats again that just like lengthen this book out so long. And as we're talking about Kaladin's story, like, one huge story beat that could have been massive, and that again is a promise made in both of the previous 2 books, is what's going on with Kaladin's family. And in the first, like, was it chapter 2 or 3 of this book, he gets to go see his family. And I was like, oh shit, this is where it's popping off. This is going to be a whole new chapter for him. What is going to happen? And like, he talks with them, I don't know, for like 10 pages. Then he pieces out, and that's it. And his parents are like, oh yeah, we're here. They hug you, and like, that's it. And he sees like his like child girlfriend, I don't know how else to say it, like the girl he grew up with and had a crush on, and she's like, oh hi, I should have saved you. Why would you think I need to be saved? That's it. And then he leaves. Like, there's so much story fodder. Why did Kaladin have to come back to the group? Leave him there with his family. Like, start an uprising. I don't know. Do something more interesting. Spend more time with your brother. But no, he just reruns Way of Kings again and again in this book. So frustrating for such a great character. And by the way, speaking of great characters, Dalinar is a great character, and his backstory is very interesting. But like, what he actually does in this whole 1,200-page book is sit around and stress about making alliances and basically failing at that until he has an epiphany because he remembers some memories and then does that. Like, okay, the odium stuff is kind of fun, but like, it's just, at the end of the day, it gets, again, all of this combined is just really slowing down and like sapping the passion I have for this series. And the love triangle. People have said this before. Shallan and Kaladin, Shallan and Adolin, neither of those couples, to be honest, are particularly interesting to me. Adolin and Shallan do have one really good conversation where they're very open, and you do get the sense that they both feel more comfortable and are like make each other better, which I think is the heart of a good relationship. But they just seem so mismatched in like a lot of their dialogue and how they talk to each other that it just doesn't seem, I don't know, great. And even that one good conversation we have, like, that it is definitely a like telling me not showing me moment for Sanderson. Like, I feel like I can see Sanderson, like as I'm reading, Sanderson is poking out from the other side of the book and saying, this is where you're supposed to start liking them as a couple. Like, you know what I mean? I feel like that a lot with Adolin. Adolin is just like a cardboard cutout of a person, like a virtuous person that Sanderson has thrown into this book. I like him, but like, he's not really given a whole lot of interesting stuff to do or be, just more than like virtuous good swordsman who loves Shallan and thinks she's cute. And Shallan is all over the place so much so that I don't know who the real Shallan is. Who should I root for her? And her and Kaladin just don't make sense. And I think it's unfortunate because I just wish that they were good friends. Like, I wish that Kaladin and Shallan were just good friends, and like that moment of intimacy they had in the caverns didn't have to be sexual or romantic. It's just like platonic, that they trust each other now and come to an understanding. That would be so much more powerful than what it is now, which is like awkward, flirtatious exes, kind of. Like, ugh. And it was resolved so quickly. I'm like, why did you put this in here to like have one book of tension that wasn't really tension? It's just, the love story was so bad. Just like, and again, added page count, added word count to a book that definitely did not need it. And just while I'm thinking about this with Shallan, I'm trying to think, is there a female character in the Stormlight Archive that has a relationship, not even just a woman-to-woman relationship, but a relationship that isn't familial or romantic? Like, I'm trying to think. All the women either have people who are they're related to, married to, or are like romantically involved with them or semi-romantically involved. Like, can't we just have some friendships in this world?
Hey everybody, Editing Andy here. I realized I forgot to mention one key example I have of how this whole book just feels sort of dysfunctioned and overly fat with detail, and that's really the ending. There's definitely a avalanche of plot and excitement that happens at the end, but Sanderson chooses to tell it in this one really long chapter that is broken off into so many different perspectives and not staying in those perspectives very long that it just feels by the end very disjointed, and it loses all of its momentum and doesn't feel like it has like a big conclusion in the sense of like the emotional gut moments, because it's just torn everywhere between like, okay, so Kaladin is doing this and then something else is happening in Shadesmar, and Yasna is over here doing this, and Renarin is doing this against a stone monster, and then Dalinar is turning into some kind of god, and Odium is there and speaking, and then at the end like Odium just kind of goes away and it's just kind of the end. Like there's no like clear climax and finish and then everything is done. Like I agree, it's completely interesting what's happening with Dalinar and what's happening with Renarin is a good like mystery plot question, but like all of the actual like story beats just don't land for me, and I think again that is like a small symptom of like this larger problem that I think this whole book has, unfortunately. All right, back to past me.
And I'm not even mentioning like a bunch of the backstory on Shardblades, a bunch of stuff on Heralds that like I didn't really understand, tie into Warbreaker, Zeth, who is somewhat interesting, but there's this whole other storyline with him. Oh, and the Skybreakers, which is like, what? Nil is happening. More stuff about the Spren, the history of Roshar, the Sunmaker, which we hear a lot more of. What's going on with the Heralds? There's just so much crammed into this book, and none of it is dealt with any depth, and all of it is just told to me, not shown to me, not developed. I really, the more I talk about this book, the more frustrated I get, and the more like I feel sapped going into Rhythm of War, which is sad. I like the Stormlight Archive. I want to like it. It's just like Oathbringer just didn't do it for me. I'm gonna probably stop there because I don't want to go overly long, and this is already probably way too long of a rant. But yeah, overall, too long, too bloated. I think this needed a sort of vicious editing job. But this definitely isn't going to stop me with this series. That is why I gave it a if you like X rating on my scale. Definitely, obviously, if you like Stormlight Archive, read this book. You probably already have. I'm still going to continue on with the series. But I was just very, very disappointed. And I'm hoping the next book is a lot sharper than this one is. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. Who am I kidding? Of course you're going to let me know in the comments below. It's a Stormlight Archive rant review. So, if you like this, please give me an upvote and let me know in the comments, because I'm probably going to get a lot of pushback, I'm feeling. Thank you guys so much for watching. Remember to subscribe to this channel. There'll be a lot of Sanderson content in the weeks to come. As always, first in, last out.